Elena thought the screaming was coming from upstairs. She was wrong. Dead wrong. The children she was babysitting were asleep. So who was screaming in the basement at 3:17 a.m.? The scream that shattered Elena's sleep at 3:17 a.m. didn't come from the children she was paid to watch. It came from somewhere beneath her feet, muffled by layers of concrete and secrets that the Blackwood mansion had been hiding for years. Elena Ripley pressed her ear against the hardwood floor of the third-floor hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The mansion around her was a tomb of silence now, but 30 seconds ago, that sound had pierced through the walls like a knife through silk. A child's scream. Raw. Terrified. And definitely not coming from 8-year-old Emma or 6-year-old James, who were sleeping peacefully in their beds just down the hall. She'd been working as a nanny for the Blackwood family for exactly 3 weeks, and until this moment, she considered herself the luckiest 24-year-old in Seattle. The job paid more in a month than most people made in 3. The children were eerily well-behaved, almost robotic in their politeness. And the mansion itself was a palace of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Puget Sound like something from a fairy tale. But fairy tales, Elena was about to learn, often had monsters hiding in the basement. Another sound drifted up through the floorboards, a metallic clang, like chains being dragged across concrete. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She glanced toward the children's rooms, their doors slightly ajar, soft night lights casting gentle glows into the hallway. Emma and James hadn't stirred. They slept like the dead, which struck Elena as strange for children their age, but she'd attributed it to their structured bedtime routine that Mrs. Victoria Blackwood insisted upon with military precision. The grandfather clock in the main foyer chimed once, marking the half-hour. 3:30 a.m. In 3.5 hours, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood would return from their monthly business trip to Vancouver, and Elena's overnight shift would end. She'd collect her generous paycheck, go home to her cramped studio apartment, and try to forget the growing unease that had been gnawing at her since her first day in this house. But forgetting was no longer an option. A whimper echoed from below, so faint she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. Almost. Elena's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, the screen's blue light illuminating her face in the darkness. Should she call the police? And tell them what? That she'd heard suspicious noises in her employer's house? The Blackwoods were pillars of the community. Jonathan Blackwood owned half the real estate in downtown Seattle. Victoria sat on the boards of 3 different children's charities. Children's charities. The irony wasn't lost on Elena as another muffled sob drifted upward, seeming to seep through the very foundation of the house like groundwater rising after a storm. She thought about her own childhood, bouncing between foster homes after her parents died in a car crash when she was 7. She remembered the fear of not knowing if the adults supposed to protect you were actually the ones you needed protection from. That feeling was flooding back now, cold and familiar and absolutely terrifying. Elena stood slowly, her bare feet silent on the plush hallway runner. She padded toward the main staircase, pausing at the top to listen. The house breathed around her, the soft hum of central air, the distant tick of clocks, the whisper of wind against windows. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Except for what was coming from the basement. As she descended the curved staircase, her hand trailing along the polished banister, Elena tried to rationalize what she was hearing. Maybe the Blackwoods had mentioned renovations? Perhaps there were workers doing late-night construction? But even as these explanations formed in her mind, she knew they were lies she was telling herself. Workers didn't make sounds like that. Construction equipment didn't whimper. The first floor of the mansion stretched out before her like a museum after hours. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, casting everything in silver and shadow. The kitchen was to her left, the library to her right, and straight ahead was a hallway that led to Jonathan's home office and what she'd been told was a storage room. But Elena had noticed something odd about that storage room during her first week. While every other door in the house was topped with decorative molding that matched the mansion's Victorian architecture, the storage room door was steel. Heavy. Industrial. And it had 3 different locks. She approached it now with the cautious steps of someone walking across thin ice. The hallway seemed to stretch longer with each step, as if the house itself was warning her to turn back. When she finally reached the door, she pressed her ear against the cold metal. Silence. Then, just as she was about to convince herself she'd been hearing things, a voice drifted through, small, broken, barely a whisper. Please. I want to go home. Hello, my incredible viewers. Before we dive into this spine-chilling story that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about trust and innocence, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments below, and while you're there, tell me how you're doing. Are you ready for a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat for the next hour and a half? If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please hit that subscribe button right now, because tonight's story is going to take you on an emotional roller coaster that you'll never forget. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Elena's blood turned to ice water in her veins. That was definitely a child's voice. Young. Maybe younger than Emma. And it was coming from behind this door that led to what was supposed to be a storage room. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone again. This time, she didn't hesitate to dial 911. But as her finger hovered over the call button, she heard footsteps on the gravel driveway outside. Car doors slammed. Two of them. The Blackwoods were home early. Elena's mind raced as she heard the jingle of keys at the front door. She was standing in a hallway at 3:30 in the morning, in her pajamas, pressed against a door she had no business being near. How would she explain this? What would she say? The front door opened with a whisper of expensive hinges. Elena. Victoria's voice carried through the mansion, artificially sweet but with an edge that made Elena's skin crawl. Darling, we're home early. Is everything all right? Elena stuffed her phone back into her pocket and tried to steady her breathing. She had seconds to get back upstairs before they found her here. She turned to run, but her foot caught the edge of an antique rug, and she stumbled. The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Footsteps approached. Fast. Purposeful. Elena managed to right herself and took 3 quick steps back toward the main part of the house before Jonathan rounded the corner. Even in the moonlight, she could see his smile, too wide, too bright, like a mask that didn't quite fit his face. Elena, he said, his voice carrying that same artificial warmth as his wife's. What are you doing down here, sweetheart? And in that moment, as Jonathan Blackwood stood between her and the rest of the house, as that endearment dripped from his lips like poison honey, Elena realized with crystal clarity that she had stumbled into something far worse than she could have ever imagined. The question wasn't what was in the basement. The question was whether she would live long enough to tell anyone about it. I heard a noise, Elena said, forcing her voice to remain steady even as her heart threatened to burst from her chest. I was checking to make sure everything was okay. Jonathan's smile never wavered, but something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker of calculation that lasted barely a second before disappearing behind his practiced charm. How thoughtful of you. But you know, old houses make all sorts of sounds. Settling foundations, pipes expanding and contracting. Nothing to worry about. Victoria appeared beside her husband, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor despite the early hour. Even at 3:30 a.m., she looked immaculate, not a hair out of place, her makeup still perfect. Elena had always found this strange. Most people looked rumpled after traveling, but Victoria Blackwood looked like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover. Did you check on the children? Victoria asked, her pale blue eyes studying Elena with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. Yes, they're sleeping peacefully, Elena replied. They've been perfect angels all weekend. They always are, Jonathan said, and there was something in his tone that made Elena's skin crawl. Pride, yes, but something else. Something possessive. We've worked very hard to ensure they're well-behaved. Elena had been caring for children since she was 16, working her way through community college and now saving money for her bachelor's degree in elementary education. She dealt with toddler tantrums, teenage rebellion, and everything in between. But Emma and James Blackwood were unlike any children she'd ever encountered. They never fought. Never raised their voices. Never even seemed to have preferences about food, activities, or bedtime stories. When Elena asked Emma what she wanted for breakfast, the 8-year-old would simply say, "Whatever you think is best, Miss Elena." When she suggested a game to James, he would nod politely and participate without enthusiasm or complaint. At first, Elena had attributed their behavior to good parenting and structure. But after 3 weeks, she was beginning to wonder if it was something else entirely. The children moved through their days like sleepwalkers, going through the motions of childhood without any of its natural chaos or joy. "Well," Victoria said, glancing at her diamond-encrusted watch, "since we're all awake, would you like some tea, Elena?" I find it helps me wind down after travel. Elena wanted nothing more than to grab her things and leave, but something in Victoria's tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. That would be lovely, thank you. They moved to the kitchen, where Victoria busied herself with an expensive tea service while Jonathan sat at the marble island, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm against the surface. Elena perched on the edge of a stool, every muscle in her body coiled and ready to run. You know, Victoria said as she measured loose-leaf tea into a silver infuser, we've been so pleased with your work. Haven't we, Jonathan? Absolutely, he agreed. The children have taken to you so well. They rarely bond with their caregivers so quickly. Elena's stomach clenched. Their caregivers? Plural. Victoria's hand paused for just a moment before continuing with the tea preparation. Oh yes, we've had several nannies over the years. Young women, like yourself. Unfortunately, most of them, well, they just weren't the right fit for our family. What happened to them? Elena asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Jonathan and Victoria exchanged a glance that lasted a fraction too long. They moved on, Jonathan said finally. Better opportunities elsewhere. You know how it is with young people, always chasing the next adventure. But Elena remembered her job interview 3 weeks ago. She'd found the position through a private placement agency that catered to wealthy families. The agent had told her it was a brand new position, that the Blackwoods had never employed live-in help before. Either the agent had lied, or the Blackwoods were lying now. Victoria poured steaming water over the tea leaves, and the scent of bergamot filled the air. Earl Grey, Elena's favorite, though she was certain she'd never mentioned this to her employers. How do you take it, dear? Just a touch of honey, please, Elena said, watching as Victoria added exactly the right amount without asking for clarification. They sat in silence for several minutes, sipping tea that tasted faintly bitter despite the honey. Elena found herself fighting drowsiness, which seemed odd given the adrenaline still coursing through her system. Tell us about yourself, Elena, Victoria said, settling into the chair across from her with predatory grace. We know so little about your background. Elena had already provided references and passed an extensive background check, but she played along. There's not much to tell. I grew up in foster care after my parents died. I've been working with children since high school, trying to save money for college. Foster care, Jonathan mused, as if tasting the words. How difficult that must have been. No family to speak of. No, Elena said, and immediately regretted the admission. Why was she telling them this? The tea was making her feel strange, relaxed but also vulnerable, as if her usual filters were dissolving. No one would miss you if you just disappeared for a while. Victoria's voice was silk over steel. Elena's blood turned cold, cutting through the strange lethargy that had been creeping over her. I have friends. Professors who would notice if I stopped coming to class. Of course, Victoria said quickly, that artificial smile snapping back into place. I only meant that it must be nice to have the freedom to travel, to take extended positions without worrying about family obligations. But Elena had heard what she'd really meant, and the predatory gleam in Victoria's eyes confirmed her worst fears. She stood abruptly, swaying slightly as the room seemed to tilt. I should go check on the children one more time before you settle in. Sit down, Elena. Jonathan's voice had lost all pretense of warmth. It was a command, not a request. Elena remained standing, though it took considerable effort. The tea. They drugged the tea. I think I should go home now. You're back earlier than expected, and dash. Sit down. Victoria's mask had slipped completely now, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. We need to have a conversation. Elena's training kicked in, the self-defense classes she'd taken after aging out of foster care, the street smarts developed from years of not having adults she could trust. She pretended to comply, lowering herself toward the chair, then suddenly bolted for the kitchen door. She made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. Jonathan caught her easily, his grip firm but not rough. Careful there, sweetheart. That's a mild sedative, nothing that will hurt you. We just need you calm for what comes next. What comes next? Elena slurred, fighting to keep her eyes open. Victoria moved to stand beside her husband, looking down at Elena with a detached interest of a scientist observing a lab rat. Well, that depends entirely on you, dear. You see, we have a very specific type of household, and certain accommodations need to be made for employees who become too curious. Elena tried to speak, but the words came out garbled. The last thing she remembered before consciousness slipped away was Victoria's voice, soft and almost maternal. "Don't worry, darling. When you wake up, you'll understand everything. And then you'll have a choice to make, one that will determine whether you become part of our family, or whether you join the others in the basement." Elena woke to the sound of children laughing. For a moment, suspended between sleep and consciousness, she almost smiled. Then reality crashed back like ice water, the tea Victoria's cold eyes, Jonathan's hands catching her as she fell. Her eyes snapped open to find herself lying on a narrow cot in what looked like a medical examination room. Stark white walls, fluorescent lighting, the antiseptic smell of bleach, and something else she couldn't identify. The laughter came again, echoing from somewhere nearby but muffled, as if the children were playing in an adjacent room. But these weren't the polite, subdued sounds she'd grown accustomed to from Emma and James. This was genuine joy, the kind of unrestrained happiness she'd never heard in the Blackwood mansion. Elena sat up slowly, fighting a wave of nausea. Her head felt stuffed with cotton, but her thinking was clearer than it had been in the kitchen. Whatever they'd given her was wearing off. She was still wearing her pajamas, soft cotton pants and a tank top, but someone had removed her slippers and placed medical-grade paper booties on her feet. The room had no windows, but a large mirror dominated one wall. Elena didn't need a criminology degree to recognize a two-way mirror when she saw one. Someone was watching her. She stood carefully, testing her balance, then moved to explore her surroundings. The door was heavy metal, like the one she'd been examining upstairs, with no handle on the inside. A small slot at the bottom could presumably be used to slide food through. In the corner sat a chemical toilet and a small sink with lukewarm water. This wasn't a guest room. This was a cell. The children's laughter grew louder, and Elena pressed her ear against the wall. The sound was definitely coming from the other side, but it was wrong somehow. Too repetitive. Too rhythmic. Like a recording being played on loop. "Hello?" she called out, her voice hoarse. "Is someone there?" The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it felt oppressive. Then faintly, she heard footsteps approaching in the hallway outside. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss, and a man Elena had never seen before stepped inside. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and the kind of rugged handsomeness that belonged in movies rather than basement prisons. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, deep brown, filled with a pain so profound it took her breath away. "Don't scream," he said quietly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not one of them." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Who are you? Where am I?" "My name is Ethan Wick," he said, closing the door behind him and moving to sit on the single chair in the room. He kept his distance, clearly trying not to frighten her further. "And you're in what the Blackwoods call their orientation facility. It's in the basement of the mansion, about 3 levels down." 3 levels. Elena's voice cracked. The mansion only has 2 floors. Ethan's smile was bitter. "That's what they want people to think. This place goes deep, Elena. Much deeper than anyone realizes." She stared at him, trying to process this information. "How do you know my name? Who are you?" "I work for them," Ethan said, and the shame in his voice was unmistakable. "Security. Maintenance. Whatever they need me to be." He paused, studying her face. "But I'm going to help you get out of here." Elena wanted to trust him. God, she wanted to believe someone in this nightmare was on her side, but 3 weeks with the Blackwoods had taught her to be suspicious of anyone who seemed too good to be true. "Why would you help me? And why should I believe you?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped between his knees. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because 6 months ago, I was in your position. Drugged, confused, locked in this same room. And someone helped me make a choice, cooperate or disappear. I chose to cooperate." The pain in his eyes deepened. "I've regretted it every day since." "What do they want from me?" Elena asked, though part of her already knew the answer would be worse than she could imagine. "The same thing they want from all the young women they bring here," Ethan said. "Compliance. Silence. And eventually—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Elena felt sick. The other nannies Victoria mentioned. What happened to them? Some of them chose to cooperate. They're still here, in other parts of the facility. The Blackwoods call them family assistants now. Ethan's voice turned hollow. They help with the children, help maintain the operation. In exchange, they get to live. And the others? Ethan's silence was answer enough. Elena sank back onto the cot, her mind reeling. The children upstairs, Emma and James. Are they? They're not the Blackwoods' biological children, Ethan confirmed. Jonathan and Victoria can't have children of their own. So they acquire them. Usually from families who won't be missed. Foster kids, runaways, children from overseas. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture so horrifying Elena could barely comprehend it. They're running some kind of trafficking operation. Not just trafficking, Ethan said grimly. They're creating a catalog. Perfect, obedient children for wealthy clients who want to play family without the inconvenience of actually raising kids. The children are trained, conditioned to be whatever their new parents want them to be. Elena thought about Emma and James's robotic politeness, their lack of personality or preferences. How long have Emma and James been here? Emma arrived 2 years ago. James about 18 months. They were different when they first came. Scared, defiant, normal. But the Blackwoods have methods. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Psychological conditioning, isolation therapy, medication when necessary. Eventually, most children learn that compliance means survival. And the ones who don't learn. They're moved to a different part of the facility. Used for other purposes. The way Ethan said it made Elena's stomach turn. She stood abruptly, pacing the small room like a caged animal. We have to call the police. The FBI. Someone has to stop this. With what evidence? Ethan asked. This entire facility is invisible to the outside world. No blueprints, no building permits, nothing. Jonathan Blackwood owns half the city council and has judges on his payroll. Victoria's charity work gives her access to vulnerable children, and no one questions her motives because she's raised millions for orphanages. Elena felt hope slipping away like sand through her fingers. So what are you saying? That we just give up? I'm saying we have to be smart about this. Ethan stood and moved closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. They're going to come for you soon. Victoria will offer you the same choice they offered me, join their operation willingly, or be forced into something much worse. When she does, you need to say yes. What? Elena stared at him in horror. It's the only way to buy us time. If you refuse outright, they'll move you to the lower levels, and once you're down there. He shuddered. Say yes, Elena. Agree to cooperate. It's the only way I can help you. Before Elena could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway, multiple people approaching. Ethan moved quickly to the door, his entire demeanor changing. The pain in his eyes was replaced by cold professionalism, and when he spoke again, his voice carried an authority that made her shiver. Remember what I told you, he said, just loud enough for anyone listening to hear. Mrs. Blackwood doesn't like to be kept waiting. The door opened, and Victoria stepped inside, looking as immaculate as ever despite the early hour. She'd changed into a crisp white blouse and black slacks that made her look like a corporate executive rather than a monster. Good morning, Elena, she said with that same artificial sweetness. I trust you slept well. Ethan's been taking good care of you, I hope. Elena glanced at Ethan, who gave her the slightest nod. Yes, she managed. He's been informative. Wonderful. Victoria's smile widened. Then you understand your situation. And you're ready to make your choice. Elena's mouth felt dry as cotton, but she forced herself to speak. What exactly are you offering me? A position in our organization, Victoria said, settling into the chair with predatory grace. You'd continue working with children, just as you've always wanted. You'd have a comfortable room, excellent meals, and a salary that's quite generous. All we ask in return is your complete loyalty and discretion. And if I refuse? Victoria's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. Let's just say that refusal would be unfortunate for everyone involved. Elena looked at Ethan again, remembering his urgent whisper. Buy time. Say yes. Trust him. She took a shaky breath and made the hardest decision of her life. I accept, she said. Victoria clapped her hands together like a delighted child. Marvelous. Ethan will show you to your new quarters and explain your duties. Welcome to the family, Elena. As Victoria swept out of the room, Elena caught Ethan's eye. He gave her another small nod, and she saw something new in his expression, a flicker of hope that hadn't been there before. But as they followed Victoria down a hallway lined with doors identical to the one Elena had just left, she heard something that made her blood freeze. Behind one of those doors, a child was crying. Not the fake laughter from before, but real heartbroken sobs. And the voice was small, young. Too young. Elena realized with crystalline horror that whatever choice she just made, whatever game she'd agreed to play, the stakes were higher than just her own life. In this basement prison, innocence itself was on sale. And she might be the only person who could stop it. Elena's new room was a grotesque parody of luxury. Plush carpet, a queen-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, a mahogany desk, and even a small kitchenette. It would have been beautiful if not for the fact that there were no windows, the door locked from the outside, and the air recycled through vents that hummed with mechanical precision. Welcome home, Ethan said dryly as he set a small suitcase on the bed. Your personal effects from upstairs. Victoria thought you'd want familiar things around you. Elena opened the suitcase to find her clothes neatly folded, her textbooks from community college, and even her favorite coffee mug, the one with a chipped handle that she'd had since she was 18. The sight of these ordinary objects in this extraordinary nightmare made her feel like she was losing her grip on reality. How many people live down here? She asked, running her fingers over the spine of her child psychology textbook. Currently, 12 women in this wing, ranging from 19 to 31. Most of them have been here between 6 months and 3 years. Ethan moved to the small refrigerator, checking its contents with practiced efficiency. They'll bring you fresh groceries weekly. The illusion of choice is important to the Blackwoods. Elena sat heavily on the bed. 3 years? How does someone survive 3 years in this place? You learn to compartmentalize, Ethan said quietly, avoiding her eyes. You tell yourself you're helping the children, that you're making their lives better while they're here. You focus on small kindnesses, tiny rebellions that make you feel human. He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. And you wait for an opportunity to escape that might never come. Before Elena could respond, a soft chime echoed through the room, followed by Victoria's voice over an intercom system Elena hadn't noticed. Elena, darling, please report to Orientation Room 3 for your first training session. Ethan will escort you. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Your education begins now, he said, moving toward the door. Remember what I told you upstairs. Stay compliant. Ask questions, but not too many. And whatever you see, whatever they tell you to do, just try to remember that resistance will come later. As they walked through corridors lined with doors, some open, revealing rooms similar to Elena's, others sealed tight, she caught glimpses of the other women Ethan had mentioned. They were all young, all beautiful in different ways, and all carried themselves with a careful posture of people who had learned to make themselves invisible. One woman, a redhead who couldn't have been older than 22, looked up from a book as they passed. Her eyes met Elena's for just a moment, and Elena saw something desperate there, a silent plea that made her stomach clench. That's Sarah, Ethan murmured. She's been here 14 months. Used to be a kindergarten teacher in Portland. What happened to her? Same thing that happened to you. Wrong place, wrong time, too curious for her own good. Ethan's voice carried a weight of guilt that Elena was beginning to understand. The Blackwoods scout for specific types, young women who work with children, who have minimal family connections, who won't be missed immediately if they disappear. They stopped outside a door marked with a small brass placard reading Orientation 3. Ethan placed his hand on Elena's shoulder, the touch brief but somehow steadying. Inside, you'll meet Dr. Patricia Crane. She runs the psychological conditioning program. She's going to try to break you down mentally, convince you that cooperation is your only option for survival. Don't let her get inside your head. How do I do that? Ethan's eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd met him, Elena saw something other than pain there. Determination. Remember who you were before this. Remember why you became a nanny in the first place. And remember that every child in this facility is counting on someone like you to stay strong." The door opened before Elena could respond, revealing a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Dr. Crane looked exactly like what central casting would order for evil psychiatrist: cold eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a crisp white coat, and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Elena Ripley," she said, consulting a tablet. 24 years old, bachelor's degree in progress, specializing in elementary education. Orphaned at 7, raised in foster care, no living relatives. "Excellent. Come in, dear." Elena glanced back at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. "I'll be right outside," he said. The orientation room looked like a cross between a doctor's office and an interrogation chamber. Comfortable chairs, soft lighting, but also cameras in every corner, and that same two-way mirror Elena was beginning to recognize as a standard feature in this facility. "Please sit," Dr. Crane said, settling into a chair across from Elena with predatory grace. "We have so much to discuss." Elena perched on the edge of her chair, every muscle tense. Ethan explained the situation. "I understand what you expect from me." "Oh, I doubt that very much," Dr. Crane laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You see, Elena, what we expect is complete psychological integration into our family structure. That's a process that takes time, patience, and a willingness to let go of outdated moral frameworks." Outdated moral frameworks. The naive belief that there are clear lines between right and wrong, good and evil. That children belong with their biological families, regardless of circumstances. That conventional morality applies to people of exceptional circumstances. Dr. Crane leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "The Blackwoods provide a service, Elena. They rescue children from lives of poverty, abuse, and neglect, and place them with families who can give them everything." Elena fought to keep her voice steady. "By kidnapping them and selling them. By relocating them to better situations. The children you'll be working with are fed, clothed, educated, and loved. Can you say the same about where they came from?" It was a twisted logic that made Elena's skin crawl, but she could see how someone might be convinced to believe it. Especially someone who was isolated, frightened, and dependent on their captors for survival. "What exactly would my role be?" Elena asked. Dr. Crane consulted her tablet again. "Initially, you'll assist with the daily care of children in Wing C ages 4 to 8. You'll help with meals, educational activities, bedtime routines. Normal nanny duties, essentially. And later. That depends on how well you adapt. Some of our family assistants work exclusively with child care. Others help with intake and orientation of new arrivals. Our most trusted employees even assist with placement procedures." Elena's blood ran cold. Placement procedures? The process of matching children with their new families. It's quite beautiful, really. We have clients all over the world who long for children but can't have them through conventional means. Infertility, age restrictions, lifestyle choices that make traditional adoption impossible. We help them become parents. The way Dr. Crane spoke about it, with genuine warmth and conviction, was perhaps the most terrifying thing Elena had encountered yet. This woman truly believed she was doing good work. "I'd like to see the children," Elena said. "If I'm going to be working with them, I should meet them." Dr. Crane's smile widened. "Of course. That's precisely what I was hoping you'd say. It shows you're thinking like a caregiver rather than an outsider." They left the orientation room and walked deeper into the facility. The corridors here were painted in cheerful pastels, with cartoon characters decorating the walls. If Elena didn't know better, she'd think they were walking through a high-end daycare center. "This is Wing C," Dr. Crane said, stopping before a set of double doors. "Currently home to 16 children between the ages of 4 and 8. They're just finishing their morning educational session." The doors opened to reveal a large, bright room filled with small tables and chairs. Children sat in groups of 4, working on what looked like normal classroom activities: coloring, puzzles, reading primers. But there was something wrong with the scene, something that took Elena a moment to identify. The children were completely silent. 16 children, ranging from preschool to early elementary age, working together in perfect quiet. No chatter, no questions, no normal childhood noise. They moved with the same robotic precision Elena had noticed in Emma and James. "Children," Dr. Crane called out in a sing-song voice. "We have a new teacher joining us. This is Miss Elena." 16 pairs of eyes turned toward Elena in perfect unison. 16 small voices responded in chorus. "Good morning, Miss Elena." Elena's heart shattered. These weren't children anymore. They were broken dolls, programmed to perform childhood rather than live it. She saw Emma and James among them, their familiar faces wearing the same empty expressions as the others. "Say hello to Miss Elena, Emma," Dr. Crane instructed. Emma stood with mechanical precision. "Hello, Miss Elena. I am happy to meet you. I hope we can be friends." The words were delivered without inflection, without any trace of the curiosity or shyness a normal 8-year-old would display when meeting a new adult. Emma might as well have been reciting multiplication tables. Elena knelt down to Emma's level, fighting back tears. "Hello, Emma. I'm happy to see you again." For just a moment, something flickered behind Emma's eyes. Recognition? Hope. But it was gone so quickly Elena might have imagined it. "Miss Elena will be helping with your care," Dr. Crane announced to the room. "I trust you'll show her the same respect and obedience you show all our staff." "Yes, Dr. Crane," came the chorus of small voices. As they left Wing C, Elena felt like she was going to be sick. Those children weren't just prisoners. They were victims of systematic psychological abuse. Whatever the Blackwoods were doing to break their spirits was working with horrifying efficiency. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Dr. Crane said as they walked back through the corridors. "So well behaved, so grateful for everything they receive. Their new families will be delighted." "How long does the orientation process usually take?" Elena asked. "That varies by child. Some adapt within weeks, others take months. We have specialists who work with the more resistant cases." Dr. Crane's tone suggested Elena didn't want to know what that meant. They were approaching Elena's wing when alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and Victoria's voice echoed over the intercom system. "Code Blue, all stations. Code Blue, Wing D. All security personnel to Wing D immediately." Dr. Crane muttered something under her breath and quickened her pace. Around them, Elena could hear doors slamming and footsteps running. Whatever Code Blue meant, it had everyone moving. They reached Elena's corridor to find Ethan waiting by her door, his face grim. "Problem in Wing D," he said tersely. "New arrival isn't adapting well." "How new?" Dr. Crane demanded. "Arrived this morning. 14-year-old girl from Sacramento. She's been asking for her parents non-stop." Elena's heart clenched. 14. Just a child, probably terrified out of her mind, thrown into this nightmare without warning. "I'll handle it," Dr. Crane said, but Elena stepped forward. "Let me try," she said impulsively. "If she's scared, maybe talking to someone closer to her age might help." Dr. Crane and Ethan exchanged glances. "That's not typically how we handle orientations," Dr. Crane said slowly. "But I'm supposed to be learning the process, right? This could be good training for me." Elena hoped her voice sounded more confident than she felt. After a moment, Dr. Crane nodded. "Very well. But Ethan accompanies you, and I want a full report afterward." As they hurried toward Wing D, Ethan caught Elena's arm. "What are you doing?" he whispered urgently. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "But I can't just stand by and let them break another child." "Elena, you can't save them all. If you try to be a hero now dash." "I'm not trying to be a hero," she interrupted. "I'm trying to be human." The screaming started before they reached Wing D. High-pitched, desperate, the sound of someone fighting for their life. Elena broke into a run, Ethan close behind her. They reached a corridor where several security guards were restraining a girl who couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds soaking wet. She had long dark hair and olive skin, and she was fighting like a wildcat against restraints that could have held someone twice her size. Her voice was raw from screaming, but she hadn't stopped. "Please. Please, I want my mama. I want to go home. Please don't hurt me." Elena felt something break inside her chest. The girl was speaking English, but with a slight accent that suggested Spanish was her first language. She was probably exactly what the Blackwoods were looking for: young, beautiful, potentially undocumented, someone whose disappearance wouldn't generate much investigation. "Let me talk to her," Elena said to the guards. "Ma'am, she's dangerous. She bit 2 of our people already." "She's a child," Elena said firmly. "And she's terrified. Give me 5 minutes." The guards looked to Ethan, who nodded reluctantly. They stepped back, though they remained close enough to intervene if necessary. Elena approached slowly, hands visible, speaking in the same calm voice she'd used with frightened foster children. "Hey there. What's your name?" The girl's wild eyes fixed on Elena. "Who are you? Are you going to hurt me too?" "My name is Elena, and I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." Elena knelt down, making herself less threatening. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lucia," the girl whispered. "I want my mama." "I know you do. I know you're scared." Elena's heart was breaking, but she kept her voice steady. "Lucia, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to help you, but right now, you need to stop fighting. Can you do that? Are you going to take me home?" Elena looked into those desperate young eyes and made a decision that would change everything. "Yes," she lied. "But first, you have to trust me. Can you do that?" Lucia nodded slowly, and the fight went out of her like air from a punctured balloon. As Elena helped the exhausted girl to her feet, she felt Ethan's eyes on her. When she glanced at him, she saw something new in his expression, something that looked dangerously like admiration. But she also saw the weight of the promise she'd just made. Somehow, she had to figure out how to keep it. Because if she didn't find a way to get Lucia out of this place, she'd become just another broken doll in the Blackwoods collection. And Elena was beginning to realize that saving these children might be worth risking everything. Even her life. I want to pause the story here for a moment because I know you're probably feeling the same rage and determination that Elena is experiencing right now. If this story is hitting you as hard as it's hitting me to write, drop a comment and let me know. And if you're not subscribed yet, please do, because Elena's journey is about to get even more intense, and you won't want to miss what happens next. 3 days later, Elena had developed a routine that felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. Mornings in Wing C with the conditioned children, afternoons helping with intake procedures that made her stomach turn, and evenings in her locked room, planning an escape that seemed more impossible with each passing hour. But it was the nights that were slowly killing her. Every night she could hear them, the new arrivals, the ones who hadn't been broken yet. Their cries echoed through the ventilation system like ghosts haunting a house built on bones. Lucia's voice had joined that chorus, despite Elena's desperate attempts to comfort her during the day. Elena was lying awake, listening to a child somewhere in the facility sob for his mother, when her door opened silently. She tensed, expecting Dr. Crane or one of the guards, but it was Ethan who slipped inside, closing the door behind him with practiced stealth. "We need to talk," he whispered, moving to sit on the edge of her bed. In the dim light from the corridor, she could see exhaustion etched in every line of his face. Elena sat up, acutely aware that she was wearing only a thin nightgown. But Ethan's attention was focused entirely on her face, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "They're planning something," he said quietly. "Victoria's been in meetings all day with clients. Big money clients." "What kind of something?" Ethan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Elena was beginning to recognize as a sign of extreme stress. "A showcase. They're planning to hold an auction." Elena's blood turned to ice. "An auction? Next week. Potential buyers from around the world, coming to select children. They do it twice a year, usually in the spring and fall. But this one's different." Ethan's voice dropped even lower. "They're planning to include Lucia. But she just arrived. She hasn't been conditioned yet. That's exactly why they want her. Some clients prefer children who still have fight in them. They think it makes the breaking process more personal." Elena felt bile rise in her throat. "We have to stop this." "Elena." Ethan's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with hers. "There's something else. Something I haven't told you." The warmth of his touch was anchoring her, keeping her from floating away on a tide of horror and rage. "What?" "I'm not just security here. I'm..." He struggled with the words. "I'm FBI. Elena stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? Deep cover. I've been here for 8 months, trying to gather enough evidence to bring down the entire operation. Ethan's thumb traced across her knuckles, a gesture so gentle it broke her heart. But every day I stay, more children disappear. And I'm starting to think the evidence will never be enough. Elena's mind reeled. You're a federal agent? Special Agent Ethan Wick, Organized Crime Task Force. I volunteered for this assignment because... He paused, his grip on her hand tightening. Because my sister was taken by traffickers when she was 12. I never found her. The pain in his voice made Elena's chest ache. Without thinking, she reached out with her free hand to touch his face. Ethan. I thought this job would help me find closure. Instead, it's eating me alive. Every night, I listen to those children cry, and I know I could end it. I have a gun, I have training, I could kill Jonathan and Victoria Blackwood tonight. But then what happens to the 12 facilities like this one scattered around the world? What happens to the network of buyers, the corrupt officials, the entire system? Elena understood now why he carried such weight in his eyes. You're trying to save all of them. And failing, Ethan said bitterly. My handler wants more evidence before we move. Concrete proof of the international connections, financial records, client lists. But in the meantime, children like Lucia are being destroyed. They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped, sharing the terrible burden of knowledge. Elena could hear her own heartbeat in the quiet, could feel the warmth radiating from Ethan's body in the small space between them. There's something else, she said finally. About the children upstairs, Emma and James. Ethan's attention sharpened. What about them? I think Emma recognizes me. Not just from when I was their nanny, but from before. There's something in her eyes when she looks at me, like she's trying to remember something important. How long have you been in Seattle? 3 years. I transferred here from Portland for school. Elena frowned, trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't fully understand. But sometimes Emma looks at me like she knew me when she was younger. Ethan was very still. Elena, what was your last name before you aged out of foster care? Ripley. It's always been Ripley. Why? And before that? When you were very young. Elena's breath caught. I don't remember much from before the accident. I was only 7. But I think. She closed her eyes, trying to reach back through years of suppressed memories. I think my parents called me something else. A nickname, maybe? Ellie. Ethan's hand went very tight on hers. Elena. I need you to think carefully. Do you remember having any siblings? No, I was an only child. The social workers were very clear about that. But even as she said it, something cold and sick was spreading through her stomach. Why are you asking me this? Ethan was quiet for so long that Elena began to panic. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Because Emma's real name isn't Emma. According to the FBI database, her name is Ellen Morrison. She was kidnapped from a park in Portland 3 years ago, along with her infant brother James. The room seemed to tilt around Elena. That can't be right. Ellen Morrison's older sister was also named Elena. She was 17 when Ellen was taken, away at foster care placement in another city. The family was told Elena had been notified, but there was a bureaucratic mix-up. She never knew her siblings had been kidnapped. Elena felt like she was falling through space. You're saying Emma is my sister? I'm saying it's possible. More than possible. Ethan's voice was gentle but urgent. Elena, your parents didn't die in a car accident when you were 7. They were murdered. The words hit her like physical blows. What? Richard and Sarah Morrison. Shot in a home invasion that police suspected was connected to your father's work as a social worker. He'd been investigating reports of child trafficking in the Portland area. Ethan's thumb was stroking her hand now, trying to comfort her through the revelation. You were at a sleepover that night. Ellen and baby James were staying with your aunt, who was supposed to pick you up the next morning. Elena's world was crumbling around her. But the social worker said, they told me I was alone. The aunt died in what looked like a car accident 2 days after your parents' murder. Ellen and James disappeared from her house that same night. You were placed in emergency foster care and told your family was gone. The memories were rushing back now, fragments of a life she'd been forced to forget. A little girl with dark curls who called her Ellie. A baby brother who giggled when she made funny faces. Parents who read bedtime stories and made pancakes on Saturday mornings. They took my family, Elena whispered. The Blackwoods took my family, and then they took my memories of them. Not the Blackwoods specifically, but people like them. The investigation into your parents' death was shut down from above. Too many important people were implicated. Elena felt rage building in her chest, pure and clean and burning. Emma recognizes me because she's my sister. And James is your brother. Elena stood abruptly, pacing to the far wall of her small room. Everything made sense now, the job posting that had seemed too good to be true, the way the Blackwoods had singled her out, the perfect match between her qualifications and their needs. They planned this, she said, turning back to Ethan. They brought me here on purpose. The next morning brought devastating news. Elena was in Wing C, helping the children with their breakfast, when Dr. Crane swept into the room with an expression of cold satisfaction that made Elena's skin crawl. "Children, we have wonderful news," Dr. Crane announced in her sing-song voice. "Some of you will be meeting your new families very soon." Elena's blood turned to ice as Dr. Crane began reading from a tablet. "Emma, James, you'll be going to a lovely family in Switzerland. They're very excited to meet you." Emma's spoon clattered into her bowl, the first spontaneous reaction Elena had seen from the girl since arriving at the facility. For just a moment, real terror flickered across her 8-year-old face before the conditioning reasserted itself. "Yes, Dr. Crane," Emma said in her mechanical voice. "We are grateful for this opportunity." But Elena saw the way Emma's hand found James's under the table, saw the silent communication that passed between them. Somewhere beneath the psychological conditioning, her siblings were still in there, still connected to each other. "The transport leaves tonight," Dr. Crane continued. "And Lucia will be accompanying another family to their home in Dubai." Elena's vision went white with rage. Lucia had been here less than a week, was still fighting the conditioning with everything she had. The idea of that terrified 14-year-old being sold to strangers in a foreign country made Elena want to scream. Instead, she forced herself to smile. How exciting for them. When will they be leaving? This evening. The buyers prefer night transfers, less chance of unwanted attention. Dr. Crane's cold eyes fixed on Elena. "I thought you might like to help with the preparation process. Consider it advanced training." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Tonight. They were taking her family tonight, and there was nothing she could do to stop it without blowing her cover and destroying any chance of helping the other children. The rest of the day passed in a blur of barely contained panic. Elena went through the motions of her duties while her mind raced, trying to find some way to prevent the transfers without getting herself, Ethan, and all the children killed in the process. She didn't see Ethan until late afternoon, when he appeared in Wing C to help with the preparation procedures. One look at his face told her he already knew about the transfers. "The vehicles arrive at 10 p.m., he said quietly as they helped Emma and James pack their few belongings. "Private jets are waiting at a small airfield outside the city." Elena's hands shook as she folded one of James's small shirts. "We have to do something." "Elena." Ethan's voice was barely audible. "My handler finally gave the go-ahead. The raid is scheduled for tomorrow morning." Elena stopped folding, staring at him in disbelief. "Tomorrow morning? They'll be gone by then." "I know." The anguish in Ethan's voice was unbearable. "I've been trying to reach my contact all day, but he's not responding. I think someone leaked the investigation." Before Elena could respond, Victoria Blackwood glided into the room, resplendent in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year. "How are our special travelers doing?" she asked, her artificial smile as bright as ever. "Emma, James, are you excited to meet your new parents?" "Yes, Mrs. Blackwood," the children responded in unison, but Elena caught the way Emma's eyes darted toward her for just a split second. It was so brief that anyone else would have missed it, but Elena saw it clearly. Emma knew who she was. "Wonderful," Victoria purred. "Now, I have a surprise. Elena, dear, You'll be accompanying the children to ensure their transition goes smoothly. Consider it a promotion. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. I'm sorry. Our client specifically requested that the children travel with a familiar caregiver. You've done such excellent work with them. Victoria's smile never wavered, but her eyes were calculating. The assignment is temporary, of course. You'll be back within a week. Elena's mind reeled. This was a trap. Victoria knew something, suspected something. Maybe she discovered Elena's connection to Emma and James, or maybe she'd simply decided that Elena was becoming too invested in the children's welfare. Either way, sending Elena away with the children meant separating her from Ethan, isolating her from any support, and That's quite an honor, Elena managed. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I thought you would be. Victoria's smile sharpened. You'll leave with the children at 10 p.m. Pack light, everything you need will be provided at your destination. As Victoria swept out of the room, Elena caught Ethan's eye. The desperation there mirrored her own. In 6 hours, she would be on a plane with her siblings, flying toward an unknown fate, while Ethan remained trapped in the facility with no way to help them. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Elena helped Emma and James with their final preparations, all the while trying to think of some way to communicate with them without alerting the ever-present cameras. But the children remained locked in their conditioned responses, polite and compliant and utterly unreachable. At 8 p.m., Elena was escorted back to her room to pack. She threw a few changes of clothes into a small bag, her mind racing. There had to be something she could do, some way to turn this disaster into an opportunity. She was stuffing her toothbrush into the bag when her door opened. Elena spun around, expecting to see a guard, but it was Sarah, the red-headed woman she'd seen reading on her first day in the facility. You don't have much time, Sarah whispered, closing the door behind her. They're moving up the schedule. The children leave in an hour. Elena's heart stopped. How do you know that? Because I've been planning my own escape for 6 months. Sarah moved to Elena's small window, checking the ventilation grate. Ethan told me about you, about who Emma and James really are. We're going to help you. We. The other women in this wing. We've been working together, gathering information, planning. We know about the airfield, the transport routes, everything. Sarah's eyes blazed with determination. Tonight, we make our move. Elena stared at her. But if you get caught, then we get caught. Sarah's voice was fierce. I've been here 18 months, Elena. I've watched dozens of children disappear into the night, and I've done nothing because I was too scared to act. But you've reminded us what it means to fight for something bigger than our own survival. Before Elena could respond, her door opened again. This time it was Ethan, his face grim. Change of plans, he said tersely. The vehicles are here early. You need to go now. Elena's heart clenched. Ethan dash. Listen to me. He grabbed her shoulders, his eyes burning into hers. Whatever happens tonight, whatever they make you do, remember that you are not alone. Sarah and the others will create a distraction. When they do, you run. You take Emma and James and you run as far and as fast as you can. What about you? I'll find you. I promise you, Elena, I will find you. He pulled her against him, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I love you. Hold on to that. Before Elena could tell him she loved him too, the door burst open and 2 guards entered. Time to go, miss, one of them said. The children are waiting in the loading bay. Elena grabbed her bag with shaking hands, looking back at Ethan one last time. He mouthed the words I love you, and then she was being escorted down corridors she'd never seen before, deeper into the bowels of the facility. The loading bay was a cavernous space filled with black SUVs and men in expensive suits. Elena spotted Emma and James immediately, standing beside one of the vehicles with mechanical stillness. They were dressed in traveling clothes, Emma in a blue dress that made her look like a porcelain doll, James in a small suit that broke Elena's heart. Ah, Elena, Victoria appeared at her elbow. Right on time. I'd like you to meet Mr. Heinrich Mueller, your escort for this evening. Mueller was a tall, pale man with dead eyes and a smile that made Elena's skin crawl. Miss Ripley, he said in accented English. I understand you'll be helping with the children's transition. How delightful. Elena forced herself to smile. I'm looking forward to working with you. Excellent. Mueller gestured toward the SUV. Shall we go? The plane is waiting, and we have a schedule to keep. As Elena approached the vehicle, Emma suddenly looked directly at her. For just a moment, the conditioning slipped, and help us, Ellie. Elena's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the space of a heartbeat. Emma remembered. Despite everything they'd done to her, Emma remembered who Elena was. As they were loaded into the SUV, Elena made a silent promise. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, she would get her family out of this nightmare. But as they drove through the night toward an unknown destination, Elena realized that the hardest part wasn't just escaping. It was the growing certainty that by the time help arrived, she and the children might already be lost in a network so vast and so well protected that even the FBI couldn't touch it. The last text message Ethan had sent to his handler had bounced back, undelivered. They were truly alone. And as the SUV disappeared into the darkness, carrying Elena toward what might be her final destination, she heard the distant sound of sirens from the direction of the mansion. Either the raid had begun early, or something had gone terribly wrong. Either way, Elena was beyond help now. She was on her own, with 2 traumatized children and a monster who smiled like a human being but had no soul behind his eyes. The darkest hour had begun. The sirens were getting closer. Elena pressed her face to the SUV's tinted window, watching the mansion's lights disappear behind a curtain of Douglas firs. In the distance, she could see red and blue flashes painting the night sky like a deadly aurora. Seems we're departing at an opportune moment, Mueller said pleasantly from the front passenger seat, as if commenting on the weather rather than what was clearly a law enforcement raid. Traffic can be so unpredictable at this hour. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. The raid was happening now, which meant Ethan was back there, possibly in danger, possibly fighting for his life. Every instinct screamed at her to demand they turn around, but Emma and James sat beside her like small statues, and she couldn't risk their lives on impulse. Not yet. The SUV wound through back roads Elena didn't recognize, heading away from Seattle toward what she assumed was the private airfield. She tried to memorize landmarks, but the darkness and her fear made everything blur together. Beside her, Emma sat with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, but Elena noticed the girl's fingers were trembling almost imperceptibly. James had fallen asleep against Emma's shoulder, or maybe he was pretending to sleep. Elena had learned that in situations like these, children often developed sophisticated survival mechanisms. Playing dead, emotional or physical, was sometimes the safest option. Tell me about the children's new family, Elena said to Mueller, trying to sound like a professional caregiver rather than a terrified sister. What should I know to help with their transition? Mueller's reflection smiled at her in the rearview mirror. The Zimmermans are lovely people. Very wealthy, very private. They have a beautiful estate in the Swiss Alps, completely isolated from the outside world. Perfect for children who need intensive rehabilitation. Elena's blood chilled. Rehabilitation. Oh yes. The Zimmermans specialize in children who have been through trauma. They have very advanced techniques for helping young minds forget unpleasant experiences. His eyes glittered with something that wasn't quite human. By the time Emma and James leave their care, they won't remember anything about their previous life. A complete fresh start. Elena fought to keep her expression neutral, even as rage built in her chest like a fire. They weren't just selling her siblings. They were planning to erase their minds completely, to destroy every trace of who they used to be. And my role? She managed to ask. You'll help with the initial adjustment period. A familiar face can be very comforting during the transition process. Mueller's tone suggested he was talking about breaking horses rather than caring for children. After that, your services won't be needed. The casual way he said it made Elena's skin crawl. She was disposable, just another loose end to be tied up once she'd served her purpose. Whatever was waiting for her in Switzerland, she wasn't coming back. Emma's hand suddenly found hers under the small blanket they were sharing. The touch was barely there, so light Elena might have imagined it, but when she looked down, she saw Emma had pressed something small and hard into her palm. A piece of paper, folded tiny. Elena palmed it carefully, waiting for the right moment to read whatever message her 8-year-old sister had managed to pass her. The fact that Emma was thinking clearly enough to communicate meant the conditioning wasn't as complete as their captors believed. Which meant there might still be hope. The SUV turned onto a smaller road, and Elena could see lights ahead, a small airport with a single runway and several hangars. A sleek white jet sat on the tarmac, engines already running. In a few minutes, they would be airborne, flying toward a fate Elena couldn't even imagine. "Beautiful aircraft," Mueller said as they approached the plane. The Zimmermans spared no expense for their new acquisitions. Acquisitions. Not children, not even products. Acquisitions. Elena forced herself to breathe slowly, fighting the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She had to stay calm, had to think. Whatever chance she had to save Emma and James would come in the next few minutes, while they were still on American soil. The SUV pulled up beside the jet, and Elena could see several men in suits waiting by the aircraft steps. More guards, more obstacles between her and freedom. But as she watched, something else caught her attention. One of the men by the plane was speaking urgently into a radio, his body language tense. Another was scanning the perimeter with night vision binoculars. These weren't casual guards, they were on high alert. The raid at the mansion was making them nervous. "Is there a problem?" Elena asked as Mueller opened his door. "Nothing that concerns you," he replied, but she could see tension in his shoulders now. "A minor scheduling adjustment. We'll be taking a more scenic route to our destination." As they climbed out of the SUV, Elena managed to unfold the tiny piece of paper Emma had given her. In careful, childish handwriting, her sister had written, "James knows the way out. Back door of plane. Emergency slides. When I count to 10. Elena's heart swelled with fierce pride. Emma might have been conditioned to appear compliant, but underneath the programming, she was still a fighter. Still Elena's little sister. They were escorted up the aircraft steps, Elena carrying the still sleeping, or pretending to sleep James while Emma walked beside them with robotic precision. The plane's interior was luxurious beyond anything Elena had ever seen. Leather seats, polished wood panels, crystal glasses already filled with what looked like champagne. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," Mueller said, gesturing to a seating area near the front of the cabin. "The flight to Zurich will take approximately 11 hours. I've arranged for sleeping medication to help the children rest during the journey." Elena's stomach clenched. Drugged and unconscious, Emma and James would be completely helpless. Whatever they were going to do, it had to be before takeoff. As the engine spun up to takeoff power, Elena noticed Emma had begun counting silently on her fingers. 1, 2, 3. Elena's eyes darted around the cabin, looking for anything she could use as a weapon or distraction. The crystal glasses. A heavy book on the side table. Her own bag, which contained nothing more dangerous than a hairbrush. 4, 5, 6. Mueller was speaking to the pilot, his back turned. 2 guards sat near the rear of the plane, but they seemed relaxed now that they were aboard the aircraft. 7, 8. Elena's muscles coiled like a spring. Whatever Emma had planned, it was about to happen. 9. Emma's eyes met Elena's across the cabin. For the first time in 3 weeks, Elena saw her real sister looking back at her, not the broken doll the Blackwoods had created, but the fierce, intelligent little girl she remembered. 10. Several things happened at once. James, who had been sleeping in Elena's arms, suddenly came alive with explosive energy. He twisted out of her grip and lunged toward the rear of the plane, where Elena now saw an emergency exit door. Emma screamed, not the polite, controlled sound she'd been making for weeks, but a raw primal sound that pierced the cabin like a fire alarm. And Elena, acting on pure instinct, grabbed one of the crystal glasses and hurled it at Mueller's head. The glass shattered against his skull with a satisfying crack, and he went down hard. But the guards were already moving, shouting into their radios, trying to restrain James as he fumbled with the emergency door mechanism. "The door won't open during flight," one of the guards yelled. "The pressure differential dash. We're still on the ground." Emma screamed back, her conditioning completely shattered now. "James, pull the red handle." Elena realized with crystal clarity that her siblings had been planning this escape for months, maybe years. They'd been watching, learning, pretending to be broken while actually preparing for this exact moment. The emergency door burst open with a tremendous whoosh of sound and rushing air. The inflatable slide deployed automatically, creating a yellow pathway to freedom. But the guards were closing in, and Mueller was struggling to his feet, blood streaming down his face. "Go!" Elena shouted to Emma and James. "Go now." Emma grabbed James's hand and they dove for the emergency exit together, tumbling onto the slide and disappearing into the darkness outside. Elena tried to follow, but a hand closed around her ankle, dragging her back into the cabin. "You're not going anywhere," Mueller snarled, his face a mask of blood and rage. Elena kicked frantically, connecting with his injured face. He howled and released her, and she dove for the exit. But she was a second too slow. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, hauling her back from the doorway. Below, she could see Emma and James running across the tarmac toward a chain-link fence that surrounded the airport. They were small and fast, and in the darkness, they might actually make it. "Let them go." Elena screamed, fighting against her captors with everything she had. "They're just children." "Those children just cost me $1 million, Mueller spat, pressing a cloth over her nose and mouth. "But you, my dear, are going to help me get them back." The smell of chloroform filled Elena's nostrils, and the world began to fade around the edges. But even as consciousness slipped away, she felt a fierce joy burning in her chest. Emma and James were free. For the first time in 3 years, her siblings were running toward freedom instead of deeper into captivity. And they were doing it because they remembered who they used to be, before the Blackwoods tried to steal their souls. As darkness claimed her, Elena's last thought was of Ethan. If he was still alive, if he'd survived the raid, he would find her. She had to believe that. Because now she had something worth fighting for that was bigger than her own survival. She had to stay alive long enough to be reunited with her family. All of her family. Including the man who taught her how to love again in the darkest place on earth. Elena woke to the sound of helicopters. She was back in a cell, not the comfortable room at the Blackwood mansion, but a concrete box with a single bare bulb and the smell of industrial disinfectant that burned her nostrils. Her head pounded from whatever they'd used to keep her unconscious, and her wrists were raw from zip-tie restraints that had been removed while she slept. The helicopters were getting closer. Through the small window high in the cell wall, Elena could see searchlights sweeping across what looked like a warehouse complex. She wasn't in Switzerland. The brief glimpse of landscape she caught looked like the Pacific Northwest, all evergreen trees and gray sky. They'd never left Washington state. "Ah, you're awake." Mueller's voice came from behind her, and Elena spun to see him watching her through the food slot in the door. His head was bandaged where she'd hit him with the glass, and his left eye was swollen nearly shut. "Good. I was hoping you'd be conscious for the final act. Where are my brother and sister?" Elena demanded, though part of her already knew the answer from the satisfaction in Mueller's voice. "Safe and sound, I'm happy to report. It turns out that 8-year-olds don't get very far on foot in the middle of the night, especially when they're being tracked by professionals." His smile was cold and triumphant. "They're in cells just like this one, waiting for their new transportation arrangements." Elena's heart shattered. "You caught them." "Of course we caught them. Did you really think 2 traumatized children could outsmart an organization that's been perfecting these operations for decades?" Mueller's laugh was like broken glass. The only thing their little escape accomplished was to drive up their purchase price. Clients pay premium rates for children who show spirit. The helicopters were almost directly overhead now, and Elena could hear shouting from somewhere in the complex. Mueller glanced up nervously, then back at Elena. "Unfortunately, your FBI boyfriend seems to have survived the raid at the mansion. He's been quite persistent in tracking our backup facility." Mueller's expression darkened. "But it doesn't matter. By the time his people breach this building, you and the children will be gone." "Gone where?" "A ship in international waters. From there, destinations unknown." Mueller checked his watch. "The transport helicopter arrives in 10 minutes. I suggest you spend that time saying goodbye to American soil." As Mueller disappeared from the door slot, Elena heard new sounds, not just helicopters now, but vehicles approaching at high speed. The rescue operation was in full swing, but it might be too late. Unless... Elena examined her cell methodically, looking for any weakness, any possible way out. The walls were solid concrete, the door was reinforced steel, but the small window was just glass set into a metal frame. If she could break it, if she could signal the helicopters somehow. She grabbed the single metal chair in the room and slammed it against the window. The glass cracked but didn't break. She hit it again harder, and this time spiderweb fractures spread across the surface. One more impact, and the window exploded outward in a shower of glass. Elena stuck her head through the opening and began screaming at the top of her lungs. Here. We're in here. Children in the basement. A searchlight immediately swiveled toward her, bathing her in blinding white light. Through the glare, she could see a helicopter hovering 50 feet away, and repelling lines dropping from its cargo bay. But she could also hear footsteps running toward her cell. Hurry! She screamed toward the helicopter. They're moving US. The cell door burst open behind her, and hands grabbed her, yanking her away from the window. But it was too late. The rescue team had seen her, had heard her. They knew exactly where the prisoners were being held. Mueller dragged Elena down a corridor lined with doors that she realized with sick horror were more cells. How many children were imprisoned in this facility? How many families had been destroyed by this operation? You've caused me considerable inconvenience, Mueller snarled as they reached a freight elevator. But don't worry, I'll make sure your new owners know exactly how much trouble you are. The elevator descended for what felt like forever, finally opening onto an underground loading dock where a helicopter waited, rotors spinning. Elena could see Emma and James being loaded into the aircraft, both children struggling against their restraints with desperate energy. Ellie. Emma's scream cut through the rotor noise like a knife. Ellie, help us. Elena fought like a wildcat against Mueller's grip, but he was too strong. As they approached the helicopter, she could see other children being loaded. Lucia was there, along with several others she recognized from the facility. But as Mueller forced Elena toward the aircraft, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world. FBI. Nobody move. The loading dock exploded into chaos as black-clad figures poured down from the upper levels. Elena saw muzzle flashes, heard shouts and gunfire, watched Mueller's men scrambling for cover behind shipping containers. And then she saw him. Ethan rappelled down from somewhere above, landing in a combat crouch with his weapon raised. Even in tactical gear, even with his face painted black, she knew him instantly. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Elena saw relief and fury and love all warring in his expression. Elena! He shouted over the gunfire. Get down. Elena threw herself to the ground as bullets whistled overhead. Mueller was shouting orders, trying to get the helicopter airborne with its cargo of children, but the FBI team had surrounded the loading dock. There was nowhere to run. It's over, Mueller. Ethan called out, his voice carrying absolute authority. Release the children and surrender. Like hell. Mueller grabbed Elena, hauling her to her feet and pressing a gun to her head. I walk out of here with the merchandise, or your girlfriend dies. Elena felt the cold metal against her temple, but instead of fear, she felt only rage. These people had stolen her family, had destroyed countless other families, had built an empire on the suffering of children. And they were going to pay for every life they'd ruined. Ethan, she called out, surprised by how steady her voice was. I love you. Take care of Emma and James. Before anyone could stop her, Elena drove her elbow back into Mueller's ribs with all her strength. He doubled over in pain, his grip loosening, and Elena spun away from him. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the enclosed space. But it wasn't Mueller who fired. Ethan's bullet took Mueller in the center of his chest, spinning him around like a rag doll. He collapsed against the helicopter's landing gear, his weapon clattering across the concrete. Clear! Voices shouted from all directions as FBI agents secured the scene. All clear. Elena ran toward the helicopter where Emma and James were still restrained, but strong arms caught her, pulling her against a familiar chest. I've got you, Ethan whispered against her hair. I've got you and you're safe, and I'm never letting you go again. Elena buried her face in his tactical vest, breathing in the scent of him, letting herself believe for the first time in weeks that the nightmare was really over. The children, she managed. Emma and James, they're They're fine, Ethan assured her. Medical teams are on the way. We're taking all of them to a secure facility where they'll get the help they need. Elena pulled back to look at him, seeing cuts and bruises on his face that spoke of his own struggles over the past day. The raid at the mansion? Successful, but they'd already moved most of the operation here. Victoria and Jonathan Blackwood are in custody, along with 37 other members of the organization. Ethan's expression was grim satisfaction. This network is finished, Elena. We found financial records, client lists, evidence of operations in 12 countries. It's going to take years to prosecute everyone involved, but it's over. A small voice interrupted them, Ellie. Elena turned to see Emma standing nearby, having been freed from her restraints by one of the FBI medics. Her little sister looked exactly the same as she had 3 years ago. Dark curls, serious brown eyes, the stubborn tilt to her chin that Elena remembered so well. Emma, Elena breathed, dropping to her knees. Oh, sweetheart. Emma launched herself into Elena's arms with such force that they both nearly tumbled over. I knew you'd come back, Emma whispered against Elena's neck. I knew you'd find us. James appeared beside them, moving more cautiously but with the same desperate hope in his eyes. He was so much bigger than Elena remembered, no longer a baby, but a real little boy with opinions and fears and dreams that had somehow survived years of captivity. Are we really going home? James asked quietly. Are we really going to be a family again? Elena looked up at Ethan, who was watching the reunion with tears in his eyes. Yes, she said, pulling both children closer. We're going to be a family again. All of us. Around them, the FBI team was processing the scene, but Elena barely noticed. After 3 years of separation, after weeks of horror and despair, she was holding her siblings again. They were damaged, traumatized, changed by their experiences, but they were alive, and they were together. There's going to be a lot of healing to do, Ethan said softly. For all of you. The Bureau has resources, therapists who specialize in trafficking victims. It won't be easy. We'll do it together, Elena said firmly. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we'll do it together. Emma pulled back to look at Ethan with a frank assessment that only an 8-year-old could manage. Are you going to marry my sister? Ethan's eyes went wide, a blush actually visible beneath the tactical face paint. Well, that is. He saved us, Emma announced to James with satisfaction. He can stay. James nodded solemnly, as if this settled the matter entirely. Elena laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in months. Give the man time to catch his breath, Em. We've got all the time in the world now. But as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she saw her own certainty reflected there. They'd found each other in the darkest place imaginable, had fought together for something bigger than themselves, had proven their love under the worst possible circumstances. Whatever came next, therapy, trials, the long process of healing and rebuilding, they would face it together. All of them. The family that the Blackwoods had tried to destroy was stronger now than it had ever been. And love, Elena realized, really could survive anything. Even this. 6 months later. Elena stood in the kitchen of their new house, watching through the window as Ethan taught James how to throw a baseball in the backyard. The 6-year-old's form was terrible, but his laughter was pure gold, the sound of a child who was finally learning how to be a child again. The pancakes are burning, Emma observed from her perch at the kitchen island, where she was methodically working through a coloring book with the intense focus she brought to everything these days. Elena quickly flipped the pancakes, smiling at her sister's matter-of-fact tone. Emma had always been direct, even as a toddler, but months of therapy had helped her rediscover her voice. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched when strangers approached too quickly, but she was healing. They all were. Perfect timing, Elena said as Ethan and James tumbled through the back door, both grass-stained and grinning. I almost caught it. James announced, climbing onto his chair with the boundless energy of a normal 6-year-old. Did you see? I almost caught it. I saw, Elena said, ruffling his hair. Pretty soon you'll be teaching Ethan a few things about baseball. Ethan wrapped his arms around Elena from behind, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Your brother has quite an arm. I think we've got a future major leaguer on our hands. The easy domesticity of the moment still caught Elena by surprise sometimes. After everything they'd been through, after all the horror and fear, it seemed almost impossible that they could have mornings like this, lazy Saturday breakfasts, arguments about chores, Emma's stern lectures about James leaving his toys everywhere. But here they were, a family rebuilt from the ashes of trauma. Mrs. Chen called, Ethan said as Elena served breakfast. The last of the Blackwood associates were sentenced yesterday. 25 to life, no possibility of parole. Elena nodded, feeling a familiar mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but it could never give back the years that had been stolen from so many children. The Blackwood network had been completely dismantled, with arrests spanning 6 countries and the rescue of over 200 children. It was the largest trafficking bust in FBI history. What about the children from the facility? Elena asked. This was always the hardest part, wondering about the other kids they'd met during those terrible weeks. Good news on that front, Ethan said, settling into his chair with his coffee. Sarah got her teaching certificate last month. She's working at a specialized school for trafficking survivors in Portland. And Lucia? He smiled. Lucia was reunited with her family. She's back in school, apparently driving her teachers crazy with questions about everything. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Sarah had become something of a hero in the survivors' community, using her experience to help other women rebuild their lives. And Lucia, fierce, brilliant Lucia, was exactly where she belonged. The Zimmermans? Emma asked quietly. She still asked about their would-be adoptive parents sometimes, though Dr. Martinez, their family therapist, said this was a normal part of processing the trauma. Prison, Ethan said simply. For a very long time. Emma nodded and returned to her coloring, but Elena caught the small smile that crossed her face. Her sister was 8 years old, but she understood justice. I have news too, Elena said, pulling an envelope from the counter. From the University of Washington. Ethan's eyes lit up. The counseling program? Elena opened the letter with shaking hands, though she'd already read it 3 times this morning. I got in. Full scholarship, with a specialization in trauma counseling for children. Ellie. Emma launched herself from her chair, wrapping her arms around Elena's waist. You're going to help kids like us. That's the plan, Elena said, holding her sister close. I figured I might as well put all this experience to good use. James looked up from his pancakes, syrup dripping from his chin. Are you going to be a superhero like Ethan? Elena and Ethan exchanged a look. To the children, the FBI agent who'd helped rescue them was pretty much Captain America. James had decided he wanted to be an FBI man when he grew up, though his career aspirations changed weekly. Different kind of hero, Elena said, but just as important. Later that morning, after breakfast was cleared and the kids were settled with their weekend cartoons, Elena and Ethan walked to the small park at the end of their street. It had become their Saturday tradition, a few minutes of adult conversation while Emma and James burned energy on the playground equipment. You know, Ethan said, taking her hand as they sat on their favorite bench, when I signed up for that undercover assignment, I never imagined it would lead to this. Elena looked at the ring on her left hand, a simple solitaire that Ethan had presented her with 3 months ago, along with the world's most nervous proposal. They decided on a long engagement, wanting to make sure the children were settled before adding another major change to their lives. Any regrets? She teased. Only one, Ethan said seriously. I wish I could have found you and the kids sooner. I wish I could have saved you from all of it. Elena was quiet for a moment, watching Emma push James on the swing set with a fierce protectiveness that had kept them both alive during their captivity. I don't think I'd change it, she said finally. Elena. I mean it. Obviously, I wish my parents had never died, wish we'd never been separated. But everything that happened after, it led us to each other. It made us who we are. She turned to face him. And who we are is pretty amazing. Ethan smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. The haunted look he'd carried during their time at the facility was mostly gone now, replaced by something that looked remarkably like peace. Besides, Elena continued, look at what we accomplished. The Blackwood network is finished. Hundreds of children are safe. Sarah and Lucia and so many others are rebuilding their lives. That's not nothing. No, Ethan agreed. That's everything. A commotion from the playground interrupted their conversation. Emma was standing at the top of the slide, hands on her hips, lecturing a group of older boys who had apparently been teasing a younger child. That's not nice. Her voice carried clearly across the park. You should say you're sorry right now. The boys, who looked to be about 10 or 11, seemed properly chastened by the fierce 8-year-old. They mumbled apologies and slunk away to find trouble elsewhere. Your sister, Ethan observed with admiration, is going to run the world someday. God help us all, Elena said, but her voice was full of pride. As they walked back toward home, Emma running ahead while James stopped to examine every interesting rock and stick along the way, Elena felt a contentment she hadn't known was possible. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more therapy sessions, more nightmares, more moments when the past threatened to overwhelm them all. But they would face it together. "Ellie," James called out, having found a particularly fascinating pine cone. "Look what I found." "That's beautiful, buddy," Elena said, accepting the pine cone with appropriate reverence. "We should put it on the nature shelf when we get home." As they reached their front door, painted cheerful yellow because Emma had insisted their house should look happy, Elena paused to look back at the life they'd built. The small house with its fenced yard, the neighborhood where people waved hello and children played safely in the streets, the ordinary magic of Saturday mornings and family dinners and bedtime stories. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It was better. "Ready to go in?" Ethan asked, fumbling with his keys while James climbed his legs like a jungle gym. "Actually," Elena said, pulling Ethan close for a kiss that tasted like coffee and possibility, "I'm ready for anything." Because she'd learned something important in that basement facility, something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Love wasn't just an emotion. It was a choice, a commitment, a force powerful enough to survive the darkest places human beings could create. And surrounded by her family, all of her family, the one she'd been born into and the one she'd chosen, Elena knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, love would be enough. It had to be. It was all they'd ever really had. And it was everything.